July 9, 1943. In the warm black waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea, an Italian battle group drifted north under blackout orders. Battleship Roma at the head, cruisers and destroyers in column, radios low, lookouts certain the night was theirs. Then something impossible crept across the bridge. A faint metallic ringing, like church bells underwater. There were no churches here, no land for 100 miles. The officers laughed at superstition. But 600 feet below, the sound was not an omen. It was mathematics. 3 American submarines, Barb, Gunnel, and Bluefish, were listening. Their sonar pings rolled through the dark like tolling bells, and the sea answered with bearings, ranges, and time to kill. A technology the surface ships could not match now ruled the water. Hydrophones heard what optics could not see. Mechanical computers, the torpedo data computers linked to periscope marks and stopwatch time, turned echoes into firing solutions. In the red-lit silence of their control rooms, American crews plotted a geometry of death. Speeds, angles on the bow, spread patterns that would intersect steel they would never see with their eyes. Above them, Italian lookouts scanned a horizon that lied. Below, the United States Navy learned that in the Mediterranean, silence could be louder than guns. By that summer, the war around Italy was breaking at the seams. North Africa had fallen, Sicily was next, and the Regia Marina, proud heir to centuries of Mediterranean mastery, was running on thin fuel and thinner luck. Its doctrine was surface strength, gunnery, optics, bravado. But the ocean's oldest rule had been rewritten. It no longer favored the ship that shone brightest by day. It favored the hunter that could hear first at night. The Tyrrhenian was a funnel, and the fleet sailing through it did not know that the trap was beneath them. On 3 submarines sealed in darkness, officers stared not at the horizon, but at dials and needles that barely moved. Range steady, bearing constant, target speed 12 knots. The orders were whispered, the hatches already open, the torpedoes already flooded. When the commands came, they did not shout. Steel sighed, air hissed. Teeth of the future left their tubes and ran silent under the skin of the sea. To the men aboard Roma, the first explosion felt like thunder with no lightning. To the Americans, who never saw their targets, it felt like a bell that had finished ringing. It was not witchcraft. It was sound turned into certainty. And by dawn, Rome would wake to silence. Summer of 1943. The Mediterranean was no longer blue. From the air, it looked stained with oil and smoke, a corridor of retreat for a dying empire. Italy, once the master of these waters, was now its prisoner. Every day brought news of collapse. North Africa was lost. Allied columns were already climbing into Sicily. Factories in Genoa stood silent, their cranes swinging in the wind. In Rome, the government still broadcast words like honor and glory, but the Navy knew better. Its fuel depots were drying up. Its ships were sailing on hope and fumes. For 2 decades, the Regia Marina had believed in speed and style. Bright hulls, perfect lines, Art Deco bridges fit for an empire. The Mediterranean was their heritage, the mare nostrum, but now it had turned against them. Invisible eyes watched from the depths. Foreign machines listened from beneath the waves. At the American base in Malta, a simple order was typed in black ink and sealed with wax. Intercept the Italian fleet before it reaches Naples. Leave no witnesses. Make the sea silent. That order found its way to 3 boats waiting in the dark. Lieutenant Commander James Holt read it twice without expression. He had lost his brother the previous year, when an Italian bomb tore through a destroyer off Tunisia. Since then, he had stopped believing in vengeance and started believing in geometry. Each submarine carried 24 torpedoes and a new generation of hydrophones, so sensitive they could trace a ship's signature through 3 layers of temperature. The men aboard called it the ear of God. Far to the north, the Italian High Command ordered the fleet southward for one final mission: to strike the Allied landing convoys off Sicily and show the world Italy still had a navy. No one told them that the Americans already knew their course, their speed, and even their radio call signs. By nightfall, the two forces were moving toward each other through the same corridor of water. One fleet lit by the moon, the other hidden in its reflection. On the surface, the Italian admiral raised a glass to the eternal sea. Below, in the control room of the Barb, Holt traced a line on his chart and said quietly, "Eternal maybe, but not merciful." July 9th, 1943. 2200 hours. The Tyrrhenian had gone completely black. Clouds smothered the moon, and the horizon dissolved into a single wall of night. Every ship on the surface ran in silence. No lights, no voices. Beneath them, three shadows moved through a darker world. Inside the United States ship Barb, the air was thick with oil and nerves. Red lamps cast a faint glow across faces drawn tight with focus. The submarine slid at 2 knots. Depth, 200 feet. The creak of the hull was steady, almost human. Lieutenant Commander James Holt stood motionless, headphones pressed to his ears. On the hydrophones, he could hear the pulse of propellers somewhere far above. 5, maybe 6 ships, turning in rhythm like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes. "That's them," he whispered. Battleship leading. Cruisers behind. Ensign Ray Harlan adjusted the gain, fingers trembling. "Range about 12 miles, sir. Course northeast." Holt nodded. "They're running blind. They do not know we're already inside their wake." A single order drifted through the control room. Silent running. Every fan, every motor, every careless sound vanished. Even the men's breathing slowed. It was the kind of quiet that made a person hear his own pulse. Outside the steel walls, the Mediterranean pressed in like an ancient memory, heavy, timeless, waiting. At 2300, the second submarine, Bluefish, reported contact. Morse code flashed across the dark. Formation confirmed. Distance closing. The wolf pack spread out. Holt's boat went deeper, taking the southern flank. The others rose slightly, forming a triangle around the Italian column. In the black water, it was a geometry of death. Angles, bearings, intercept times. "Temperature layer at 250 feet, Harlan whispered. "Perfect for masking." "Hold here," Holt said. "Let them pass over." Minutes dragged into hours. Each tick of the clock was a lifetime. Through the periscope tube, condensation dripped like rain. At 1:45 in the morning, the sonar picture sharpened. The fleet was directly above. The propeller beats filled the headphones. Deep, slow, magnificent. Holt could almost imagine the ships gleaming in the dark, flags folded, sailors unaware that hell floated beneath them. He lifted the periscope handle and murmured, "Upscope." A flash of silver appeared. The hull of a cruiser gliding through moonlight between clouds. It was so close the lens trembled. He whispered, "Angle on the bow. 40 degrees. Range. 8,000 yards. Flood tubes 1 through 6. The torpedo officer nodded once, sweat beading along his temple. "We fire when they cross the line," Holt said. "Not before. The first sound they hear will be the last sound they ever understand." The sea held its breath. July 10th, 1943. 2:15 in the morning. The Italian fleet moved in a straight, proud line across the Tyrrhenian Sea. Battleship Roma leading, flanked by the cruisers Eugenio di Savoia and Montecuccoli. Their wakes glowed faintly under a thin layer of cloudlight. Above deck, the sailors felt safe. The night was theirs. The radio spoke softly of honor, of empire. 600 feet below, Lieutenant Commander James Holt watched the line of bearing Titan on his plotting table. "They're on the mark," he said quietly. "Stand by." In the red light of the United States, ship Barb's control room, the air felt electric. Compressed air and fear mingled in every breath. Flood tubes 1 through 6. Flooded, sir. Set depth to 20 feet. Range 7,000 yards. Firing angle 082. The crew responded with soft acknowledgments. No one raised their voice. War at this depth demanded reverence. Holt waited, counting the seconds between propeller beats. When they aligned perfectly, he whispered, "Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. A hiss. The submarine trembled. 6 white lines of death slipped into the dark, invisible and merciless. The sound of the torpedoes was nothing more than a heartbeat underwater, a rhythm the ocean barely noticed. Holt exhaled slowly. Down periscope. Take her deep. The Barb dove to 300 feet. The crew stared at the depth gauge, listening for what they could not see. 1 minute, 2, 3. Then it came. A muffled boom, distant but heavy enough to rattle bolts loose. Then another, closer. Then a third that sounded like the sky itself had cracked open. Above, the Italian fleet convulsed. The first torpedo struck Eugenio di Savoia amidships, lifting her stern clear of the sea before fire swallowed her decks. A second slammed into the battleship Roma's bow, folding steel like paper, igniting her forward magazine. The explosion was blinding, a column of fire that reached the clouds. Sailors were thrown into the air, their shouts lost to thunder. On the Barb, the sound arrived as pressure, a low, rolling growl that shook every man to his core. Holt's face stayed calm. Reload tubes. Prepare for second salvo. Targets? Asked the executive officer. Anything still breathing, Holt replied. At 2:30, Bluefish and Gunnel joined the attack. 9 torpedoes streaked through blackness. The Italian formation dissolved into panic. Destroyers veered wildly, searchlights flashing across smoke and ruin. Some fired depth charges into empty water, chasing ghosts. Holt listened through the hydrophones. All he could hear now was chaos. Engines screaming, explosions overlapping, men shouting in languages swallowed by the sea. Then slowly the noise began to fade. By 2:50 it was gone. The fleet was silent. Holt removed his headset, stared at the condensation running down the steel wall and said softly, "Surface. Let the sea show us what's left." The Barb rose through darkness until the periscope broke the surface. Holt looked. The horizon burned, oil fires stretching for miles, wreckage glowing like dying stars. He whispered, "Rome's pride, gone before dawn." No cheer came from the crew. Only quiet awe. The Mediterranean, once the stage of empires, now reflected nothing but flame. At 300 miles away in Rome, radio operators called the fleet again and again. No answer, only static. And when the sun rose over the Tyrrhenian, it found an ocean without a sound. The Americans had left nothing behind, not even an echo. July 10th, 1943. Dawn. The Tyrrhenian Sea was quiet again. Too quiet. The smoke from the burning wrecks rose like the ghosts of ships, drifting east toward the pale light of morning. The sun touched the water, and what had been a battlefield only hours earlier now looked like a graveyard. Debris floated across miles of sea. Lifeboats half filled with oil, shattered planks, the warped outline of a brass compass still pointing north. Seabirds wheeled overhead, circling a horizon that shimmered with heat and silence. The war in the Mediterranean was still raging, but here, in this stretch of water west of Italy, it had ended in one night. The United States ship Barb surfaced at dawn. Her hull broke through the slick black water like a blade through silk. Men climbed onto the conning tower, blinking against the sudden glare. They expected gunfire, sirens, something, but the sea only whispered. Lieutenant Commander James Holt stepped out last. He raised his binoculars and saw nothing that resembled an enemy fleet. Only burning patches where the Roma and Eugenio di Savoia had once been. For a long while he said nothing. The air smelled of fuel and salt and victory without joy. The executive officer joined him. "We got them all, sir." Holt lowered the glasses. "No," he said. "The sea got them. We only told it where to look. Below deck, the crew sat in silence, eating rations they could not taste. Some smiled, some trembled. No one celebrated. They all knew they had witnessed something final. Not just a victory, but an ending. By mid-morning, Allied reconnaissance planes reached the site. Photographs showed nothing but smoke and slicks stretching for miles. The Italian fleet, once the pride of Rome, had ceased to exist. Its admiral was gone, his name later found on a list of the missing. When the news reached the Italian coast, the radio announcer read a brief message. Contact with the Tyrrhenian fleet has been lost. Communications temporarily disrupted. There was no mention of submarines, no mention of defeat, only a strange, nervous silence that spread through every street in Rome. People stepped out onto their balconies, listening to the static between bulletins, as if the sea itself might call back. It never did. In Washington, the report was filed under the name Operation Stillwater. The summary was a single paragraph. Objective achieved. Enemy fleet neutralized with 0 casualties. No decoration accompanied it. No speeches, just a note in an archive. A war ending quietly where the world had expected thunder. That night on the deck of the Barb, Holt stood alone. The sky above him was perfectly clear, the stars returning after a night of smoke. He thought of his brother's ship, lost to Italian bombs the year before, and of the men who had gone down believing the sea could be tamed. He reached for his logbook and wrote one final entry. "We avenged the dead, but the sea keeps the better memory." He closed the book and stared east, toward a continent still burning. For the first time in years, he felt no triumph, only the weight of silence. The Mediterranean had once been the cradle of empires. That morning, it became their grave. The ocean did not roar or rage. It simply turned inward, swallowing history without a trace. When dawn finally broke over Rome, the city woke not to sirens or parades, but to the absence of sound. The quiet realization that the empire of the sea had ended overnight. In the end, the narrator's voice fades. The future did not arrive with noise or glory. It came beneath the waves, and it spoke in whispers. If you felt that silence, if stories like this pull you into the forgotten corners of history, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon, and join our crew of history enthusiasts who believe the past still has echoes worth hearing. Every day we uncover another moment when the world changed. Not with shouts, but with silence.